my definition of maximalist is just someone that believes Bitcoin is an instrument of economic empowerment. That doesn't mean that you can't own Apple stock. It doesn't mean that you can't have a beachfront house in Florida, right? You can believe in a nation state. As long as there are nation states, there will be currencies issued by nation states, right? It is what it is. I'm in favor of the United States continuing to exist, and they'll issue the dollar. As long as we live in a world of corporations, corporations will issue securities. Apple's got one. Microsoft's got one. As long as we need buildings, real estate companies will buy buildings. They may sell, shares in a real estate investment trust. You can own a building. You can get rent on it. So, and as long as they're entrepreneurs, they're going to create new things. So I think that you can believe that Bitcoin is better than just digital monopoly without dismissing a bunch of other ideas. Every idea should be evaluated on its own merits.
Today's clips are from the Scoop podcast. The full interview is linked in the description. Frank Chaparro interviews Michael and asks him about inflation in this first clip. Michael explains that that's why on August 10th, 2020, as the world was being turned upside down, that's when MicroStrategy made that first buy of $250 million worth of Bitcoin.
Let's just start with all the asset classes over the past 2.5 years and consider what's happened since the summer of 2020. I mean, the entire world was turned upside down in the summer of 2020, and a lot of, you had the meme stock explosion, you had the SPAC thing, you had lockdowns, you had interest rates at zero, a lot of confusion. But, our view was there was going to be inflation of the money supply, certainly, right? If you take interest rates to zero and you print unlimited dollars, then there's going to be inflation. The question is, where is the inflation going to land? Especially, and there's two questions. Where will inflation land for consumers? Like, what consumer items will get more expensive? Will it be, food or shelter or energy? And then where will the inflation land in financial assets? So I'm going to focus on financial assets. On August 10th, 2020, MicroStrategy announced we were going to buy $250 million worth of Bitcoin. And we announced we were doing it because we had a bunch of money. We had $500 million in cash generating 0% yield. And we figured we couldn't hold the cash, and we should go ahead and invest it in something. We either had to give it back to the shareholders or we had to buy something with it. And we went through an exercise. Do we buy art or property or securities or gold or silver or soybeans or oil? And ultimately, we decided, well, we would give half of it back to the shareholders. We announced a $250 million buyback in the form of a Dutch auction at a premium. I think our stock was around 121, 122, and we announced we'd buy back the stock at 140 if anybody wanted to tender their shares. And then the other half, we would buy Bitcoin with it. And we bought Bitcoin because we saw it at that point as digital gold, a non-sovereign a non-sovereign bearer instrument, store of value asset. And we liked it better than gold because gold miners make more gold, and because gold is a 19th century idea. You can't teleport gold at the speed of light. And we kind of felt like Bitcoin had the appeal of a big tech network. And it also had the appeal of a tangible commodity that was the most scarce commodity. So what happened? In that time period, since August, we're now not quite 3 years into it, but I guess in 2 months will be 3 years. So we're 34 months into this experiment. Silver is down 21% since that day. Silver is disaster. Bonds, if you bought long-dated bonds, they're down 19%. So, you could have guessed a very weak commodity and credit, both of those not good investments. What about gold? Gold's down 5%. Gold's dead money. So all that money printing, none of it found its way into gold. So what went up in value, or what up in price at least? The NASDAQ is up 23%, and the S&P is up 29%. So actually, the S&P outperformed NASDAQ. With NASDAQ, you kind of had some winners and you had some losers. Bitcoin is up 153%. So Bitcoin's outperforming the S&P by a factor of 5. It's left gold in the dust. We know, I don't have a particular real estate index to give you, but I think anecdotally commercial real estate was high, and now it's getting hammered by the interest rates coming up, and residential real estate advanced rapidly for about a year or two, and now mortgage rates are 7%, and people are talking about the residential real estate market being down. Let me give you a few more stats that are interesting. MicroStrategy bought the 250 million of Bitcoin, and then our Dutch auction resulted in only about 60 million getting tendered. So we took another 175 million and bought more Bitcoin. Then our stock rallied, and so we bought more Bitcoin, and then we were able to issue a convertible bond and buy more Bitcoin, 650 million worth of it. And then we were able to issue $1 billion convertible bond at 0% interest and buy more Bitcoin. And then we were able to sell $1 billion worth of equity and buy more Bitcoin. Then we were able to issue a junk bond. Actually, the junk bond became before the equity, 500 million at 6% interest, which looks pretty cheap now. We bought more Bitcoin. And all told, we bought a bit more than $4 billion of Bitcoin, and we bought it at every price. We bought it at 10,000. We bought it at 20, 30, 40, 50. We even bought some at 60,000. Okay, net result, think of it as Bitcoin cost averaging, for a corporation. Our stock's up 165%. So we actually outperformed Bitcoin over the same time period simply by adopting a Bitcoin standard and sweeping cash flows and equity and debt and the like into Bitcoin.
In this second clip, Michael narrows his focus to just crypto and how the Bitcoin deniers are basically gone and the Bitcoin skeptics are even pretty quiet. More investors are entering the space, and they'll be followed by the technocrats. The fact that Bitcoin is a digital commodity can no longer be denied. Enjoy the clip.
Yeah, if we switch the focus just to the crypto industry as opposed to macroeconomics, and the last macroeconomic observation is that, interest rates did go to zero. They stayed at zero for 18 months. Then they got jacked up to 500 basis points in 12 months. It started breaking the banks. It really crimped the commercial real estate industry, the residential real estate industry. It squeezed the equity markets. And now we're kind of like at this point where it's not clear, do they creep up a little bit or the interest rates to come back in? But I think we're at the end of that aggressive tightening cycle. And at some point, they're going to have to loosen monetary policy. So we're poised there. In the crypto industry, I think in general, the question is Bitcoin going to be banned, hacked, or copied? Right? It was the biggest crypto asset 3 years ago, but will it be banned? Will it be hacked? Will it be copied? That's the question for any investor. What happens next? There used to be a lot of Bitcoin skeptics. There were, people, there were the deniers. I talk about them, people that think Bitcoin is tulip bulbs and a Ponzi scheme. Peter Schiff being the most famous. The deniers are pretty much silenced now, right? I mean, they have fallen out of consensus. Bloomberg, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Congress, the SEC, the CFTC, the Treasury, all the central banks of the world, they all kind of acknowledge it's not tulip bulbs. It's a real asset. It's a digital commodity. So the deniers are out of the mainstream. Then you have the skeptics, like Bitcoin is really good idea, but it's too good idea, so the government's going to ban it. And we had, Jamie Dimon said it, you've got other people that said it, Larry Fink once said, it's an index of money laundering. So the skeptics held the day for a while. But I think in the last 24 to 36 months, the skeptics have kind of fallen out of the mainstream as well, because you can't with a straight face go on CNBC and say Bitcoin's going to be banned when they've got the ticker in the lower right corner, and they've got the head of the SEC, the head of the CFTC, and the Secretary of the Treasury, and then Jerome Powell all saying, I think it's going to be around for a while. It's a real thing. So The skeptics don't really have much power. So now, if it's an asset, you've got a bunch of investors, and maybe you love it, maybe you hate it. You're like, if you're an investor, you acknowledge it as an asset class, and you can either go long, go short, or trade the volatility. I think that you've seen a lot more investors coming into this space, and for a while they thought it was correlated to risk assets, and so they would short it to hedge their risk portfolio, right? And then they thought it was not correlated or negatively correlated, and so that view has evolved over time. But to your point, the best thing that could happen to Bitcoin is the volatility decreases a bit, but the correlations break down, because if it's an uncorrelated asset and it's a legitimate asset, then most of the financial world is underexposed, right? You've got $500 trillion of liquid financial assets floating around, and 0.1% of that is Bitcoin. So if it gets to be 1%, right, 2%, then it's going up by a factor of 10 or more. I think that
So the magic recipe there, or the sweet spot, is uncorrelated, low volatility Bitcoin.
yeah, I think so. I think we'll get the uncorrelated, and how much volatility we get, it's unclear. But as more people adopt it, and as liquidity increases in the mainstream institutional investor market, I think the volatility will decrease and is decreasing. I mean, the last two investor classes are the technocrats. And this is a set of investors you want. They're the people that think Apple and Google and Amazon and Facebook and Microsoft are really powerful networks. And you can see the big winning stock ideas have been Microsoft, Apple, and Google. And the reason why is because they're more powerful than most nation states. It should be pretty clear to people right now that Apple has 1 billion users, and it would be easier for you to leave the United States of America and pick up your life elsewhere than it would be for you to leave the Apple ecosystem. And it's a very interesting idea, but if you're a tech investor, you could get behind that idea, and eventually just about everybody that got insanely wealthy over the past 20 or 30 years was a technocrat, really, if you think about it. And then eventually you get the Warren Buffetts and you get the Carl Icahns of the world that say, I don't know if I understand it, but it seems like a juggernaut, so I guess I'll buy $10 billion of it. And Warren Buffett made more money on Apple stock than he made in his entire life on everything else you've ever heard of. And he made that money faster. And so the technocrat, kind of wins over the mainstream investor. And Bitcoin is emerging as this dominant digital monetary network, or dominant digital commodity network, or you could call it dominant digital property network. The thing that's most controversial is currency. Currency is very controversial. Every nation state wants to control their own currency. Currency is a medium of exchange.
Sometimes other countries want to control the currency of other countries.
And you could say it's a system of control, right? A medium of exchange, a unit of account, a store of value. But the fourth thing, the system of control, turns out to be really, really important. So digital currency networks are very controversial, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But on the other hand, owning property is not controversial. And if Bitcoin is digital gold, then there is no nation of gold with subpoena power that's going to attack you for taking away its monetary premium. And the same is true if Bitcoin is better investment than real estate. Well, Congress and the Treasury and the FBI and FinCEN, they're not going to take a lot of issue with the fact that you actually demonetize some commercial real estate by 2%. So Bitcoin is emerging as this digital property network, and it meets the use case of store of value. And all of the endorsements have made a huge difference. I mean, you've got 4 presidential candidates that have come out pro-Bitcoin. That's kind of like a chicken in every pot, and everybody deserves their own home. And if everyone has an entitlement to own their own home, and I'm going to launch Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and I'm going to make home mortgages cheap because every American deserves to own a home, what you get is a lot of money flowing into that asset class, the entire mortgage-backed security asset and real estate. And there's a reason real estate's gone up 7% a year in all these cities for the last 100 years, right? Because it's a supported asset class. I think that Bitcoin is emerging as a supported asset class. If you've got the regulators endorsing it, Congress endorsing it, legislators endorsing it, you've got candidates endorsing it, then I think you've turned a corner. So I think we've turned a corner where you're either going to be an investor or a technocrat, or the last is maximalist. And maximalist has sometimes people painted with this very, controversial brush, but I just think of maximalist as someone that thinks they're technocrat that thinks it's an ethical good, like the don't be evil. Remember when Google said don't be evil? If you thought it's an ethical good to give property rights to 8 billion people, and everybody in Africa, South America, and Asia deserves property rights, and you see a network that is nation state resistant, that is not controlled by any company, that's a global network, that's open, permissionless, then you could just say, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. I believe this is an instrument of economic empowerment. It's good for the world. And that's not any different than saying I'm a math maximalist. People should learn mathematics. I think they should learn language. They should learn to read, write, do arithmetic. I'm in favor of fire and electricity. And so once you take that view, it's a bit stronger commitment than if you're a technocrat. Apple and Google and Facebook, they don't operate in China the same way, especially Facebook and Google and Twitter. They're not in China at all. So when you're at the technocrat level, you're hitched your wagon to a corporation, and corporations are subject to, leverage by nation states in the way that an open permissionless protocol like English or math or Bitcoin are not subject to. So that's what we're seeing right now. And I think everything's just been generally bullish and not easy, struggle, volatile, but progressing in a decent way for the good of the human race.